Hey guys, welcome back to Chit Chat. Today we'll be talking about another murder, the Anthrax Murder.
Anthrax murder that killed 5 people after they were exposed to anthrax. On Tuesday, October 16, 2001, Norma Wallace reported for work at the postal office in Trenton, New Jersey. Norma wasn't feeling well and thought it was a mild case of the flu, but as the day wore on, she became increasingly ill. She could barely breathe.
Some 200 miles away in Washington, D.C., another postal worker, Leroy Richmond, was suffering nearly identical symptoms. He too became gravely ill. In a matter of days, both Norma and Leroy were hospitalized, and their conditions grew worse by the hour. They seemed to be slowly suffering to death, and doctors couldn't find out why. But after administering a battery of tests, they finally came out with a diagnosis: anthrax poisoning.
Like millions of other Americans, Leroy and Norma were aware that anthrax had killed a man in Florida just days earlier. Now they were suffering from the most deadly form of disease. Suddenly, in the wake of September 11th, the nation had faced a second wave of terrorism. The anthrax terror plot came to light on October 5th, 2001, in Boca Raton, Florida. 63-year-old Robert Stevens, a photo editor at the Sun newspaper, died after he was exposed to anthrax spores. Experts believe they came from a letter that was opened, but the letter had been thrown away, its origin unknown. Suddenly, federal investigators were thrust into the world of bioterrorism. According to Van A. Harp, assistant director of the FBI's Washington field office, it proved to be no ordinary crime scene.
We don't have a crime scene in the traditional sense. We don't have witnesses, and we really don't have anyone that we can call an informant at this point. The same week in Manhattan, NBC News and the New York Post received anthrax-tainted letters, but this time there was a clue: postmarks on the envelopes from Trenton, New Jersey. A swarm of FBI agents checked every mailbox in town for traces of anthrax. They found none.
Then, on October 9, 2001, in Washington, D.C., 2 more letters laced with anthrax were discovered. Once again, they were postmarked Trenton, New Jersey. This time, politicians were the targets. Senators Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy at their offices in D.C. According to Dr. Merrill Nass, the letters contain a form of anthrax so pure and concentrated it was termed weapons grade. This is dangerous stuff. It was estimated that 2 trillion spores went into each of these envelopes, which would have been 2 grams. One envelope may have had 100 million lethal doses. Under the right conditions, just 2 grams of anthrax could potentially wipe out 1/3 of the U.S. population. Investigators came to a significant conclusion. Notes contained with the anthrax-laden envelopes had similar handwriting, leading authorities to believe they came from the same source. Did references to 9/11, death to Israel and Allah is great, point to Arab terrorists, or to someone who wanted investigators to think Arab extremists were involved? Assistant Director Harp said the FBI was looking at 3 broad possibilities. The first being international terrorists, domestic terrorism. We're looking at some of the individuals within the United States, and then we're looking at the lone wolf as well.
By October 28th, postal worker Norma was fighting for her life. Her temperature had soared above 100. She was in shock. The anthrax spores were releasing a lethal toxin, causing blood vessels to break and the bacteria to pulse through her bloodstream. I felt like I was dying. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Once a spore enters your lungs, they attack the tissues and the lymph nodes, and this causes the anthrax to actually take possession of your body.
Prognosis for Leroy Richmond was also grim. Suffering excruciating pain, Leroy laid helpless as his lungs filled with fluids. Even worse was the fact that doctors knew their most powerful drugs were rarely effective in fighting the silent killer. Leroy recalled how he practically stared death in the eye. I think I was as near to death then as I ever was going to get. My breathing had become so shallow that I was actually panting like a dog would breathe. And I heard a couple guys say, "Man, he's not going to last but a couple of hours, and that will be it for him." Miraculously, both Norma and Leroy survived their harrowing ordeals. However, 4 other anthrax victims were not as lucky, bringing the death toll to 5. In Washington, D.C., Leroy's co-workers, Thomas Morris and Joseph Cursine, and in New York City, hospital worker Kathy Nugent. 3 weeks later, Ludren in Derby, Connecticut. There's an update. On July 27, 2008, a government scientist named Bruce Ivins was rushed to a Maryland hospital suffering from a massive overdose of prescription drugs. He died 2 days later. Shortly after, the FBI announced that Dr. Ivins had been the prime suspect in the anthrax terror of 2001. One of the country's leading anthrax researchers, Dr. Ivins, helped investigate the attacks that killed 5 Americans and terrorized the nation. But Ivins eventually became a suspect himself, and according to the FBI, there is no doubt that he was the anthrax killer. The case is officially closed, though a motive for Dr. Ivins' alleged crimes has not been established.
Thank you for listening. Bye.